It started with silence. Not the kind that brings peace. The kind that builds pressure. The kind that warns you something is about to go very, very wrong. The desert was empty, vast, and sun-bleached, stretching endlessly in every direction. It was the kind of place people vanished in. No witnesses. No questions. No one to hear you scream. And maybe that's why they chose this place. 3 black SUVs sped across the dirt, tires digging into the sand. The engines roared like thunder rolling in. Inside, a team of federal agents, armored, masked, locked and loaded, prepared for what they believed was a standard extraction. A man flagged on a watch list. Suspicious activity near the border. Possibly armed. Possibly hostile. Probably nothing. But they were wrong. Completely, dangerously wrong. As they approached the location, the target stood still, just outside an old pickup truck. Gray hair. Dust-covered boots. Worn denim. The man looked like a relic of another time, and in many ways, he was. He didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He stood there, hands at his sides, like he had been expecting them. "Step away from the vehicle," one agent shouted. No response. Another moved in cautiously, weapon raised. "Hands where we can see them." The man complied, slowly raising his arms. No fear. No anger. Just calm, unnerving, practiced calm. That's what shook the team more than anything. The takedown was swift. They moved in as a unit, shouting, restraining, pinning him to the ground. Dust flew into the air. A boot pressed into his back. Plastic cuffs locked around his wrists. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He let it happen. And not because he was weak. Because he was thinking. Because he had been in far worse situations than this, and survived every one of them. They pulled him up roughly, looked him over, and saw what they wanted to see, an old man. No threat. No resistance. No problem. But in that moment, with the sun scorching their faces and sweat soaking their vests, they missed something critical. The eyes. They weren't scared. They weren't confused. They were measuring them. Watching. Calculating. Quietly waiting for them to make the next mistake. The lead agent scanned the arrest file. Cole Ryland. Suspicious activity. Possible paramilitary links. Living off-grid. No tax record in over 10 years. Cole said nothing. He didn't need to. Because every word they needed to hear was in that silence. They shoved him into the SUV and began the long drive back to the command outpost. The ride was quiet at first. One agent looked at him in the rearview mirror and scoffed. "Not what I expected. Thought we'd get a fighter. Not Grandpa in a flannel." The other agent chuckled. "Probably another old nutcase who thinks he's in a militia." Still, Cole said nothing. He was watching the terrain. Watching the time. Listening. Counting the turns. He didn't need to escape, yet. First, he needed to know who had sent them. And more importantly, why. Because he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he had been erased. 10 years ago, Cole Ryland had disappeared from every federal system. A planned disappearance. One orchestrated by the very people who had once called him a weapon. He wasn't retired. He wasn't missing. He was dormant. Before that? Cole had served over 2 decades in a classified Black Ops unit embedded deep within the military infrastructure, so far below the surface that even high-ranking officers only heard rumors. His missions had no names. His victories had no medals. His failures didn't exist. And now, some fresh-faced federal team had dragged him out of the shadows, without knowing the cost. At the outpost, agents processed him like any other detainee. He was fingerprinted, photographed, scanned. His belongings were tossed into a plastic bin, a faded wallet, a military-style watch with no markings, a combat knife dulled by time and use. But when they ran his prints, the system stalled. Scan failed, the technician said, frowning. The agent rolled his eyes. Try again. Same result. Data restricted. Clearance level exceeded. That's when the phone rang. Not a cell phone. Not the base line. But the red phone. The one no one touched. The one no one ever expected to ring. The room fell silent. The lead agent picked it up slowly. Yes? A pause. Then a voice. Calm. Cold. Higher up than he'd ever spoken to. You need to release that man. Now. The agent blinked. We're still processing. I said now. Sir, we don't even know who he really is. You don't need to. The line went dead. The agent stood still for a moment. Then turned, pale. No one said a word. Cole, still seated in the holding chair, tilted his head slightly, as if listening to the quiet panic spreading across the room. Then, for the first time since his arrest, he spoke. I suggest you unlock the cuffs. The agent hesitated, then nodded to the nearest officer. As the plastic zip ties were removed, Cole slowly stood. His movements were deliberate. Controlled. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and looked each agent in the eye. You came here thinking I was a threat, he said. You were wrong. A beat of silence. I'm worse than that. He walked out of the room without another word. No one stopped him. No one followed. Because now, they understood, they hadn't arrested a criminal. They had awakened something that had been asleep for too long. The agents didn't speak for a long time after Cole left the room. The silence wasn't routine anymore. It wasn't discipline. It was fear. He had said only one sentence, but that was all it took to turn the hunters into the hunted. The old man they thought they had captured? He wasn't their prisoner. He was their punishment. Cole stepped into the desert light, calm, uncuffed, and utterly unbothered. The dust clung to his boots like it had followed him for decades. But he kept walking. Because he knew exactly what had just happened. They tried to reactivate a ghost. Now, they had to live with what they woke up. Inside the facility, Agent Cooper was shaking. Not visibly, not yet, but inside, he knew. That call didn't come from his superior. It came from above. From the kind of person you never hear from unless you've already made a mistake. And they had made a huge one. They had touched something buried. They had forgotten why it was buried in the first place. Cole wasn't going to run. He had no interest in hiding. He had already done that for a decade. The moment they put their hands on him, the silence ended. Now, it was time to act. 30 miles northeast, in a forgotten part of the desert, Cole reached a hidden communications outpost, camouflaged, offline, sealed for 20 years. He entered with an old access code that still worked. That was their second mistake. Inside, he recovered what he had left behind, a secured drive, a weapon, and a file no one was supposed to ever read again. Operation Firelight. Cole opened the file. What he saw wasn't just classified, it was lethal. Civilian targets, international manipulation, unauthorized surveillance, all greenlit by a task force that no longer officially existed. Except it did. Quietly. In shadows. Moving pieces behind governments and wars. And Cole? He had been one of the pieces, until he refused. That's why they erased him. But now, they needed Firelight operational again. And someone had decided the easiest way was to eliminate the past. They should have known better. They should have remembered who trained the monsters. They should have left him alone. He walked out of the bunker, carrying the only copy of that file. Behind him, everything burned, the documents, the footage, the location. If they wanted what he knew, they'd have to come for him again. But this time, he wouldn't wait. By the time the agents returned to their headquarters, a new video was circulating on private intel channels. No watermark. No origin. Just footage of a man walking into a hidden military compound, and never coming out. Attached to the video was a message. If I disappear again, this goes global. Cole Ryland didn't need revenge. He needed leverage. And now, he had it. Somewhere far from where it all began, he boarded a private plane under a false name, using credentials buried so deep in the system that even the people who issued them were long dead. He wasn't going into hiding. He was reclaiming control. Because they thought they could silence him. But now, the world would only ask one question. Who the hell was Cole Ryland? And no one would dare answer.